Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk, where our goal is to engage, inspire, and empower the global community of risk practitioners. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today I'm super excited to welcome my guest, Tibor Zechmeister. He is the head of quality and regulatory at Flynn.ai, with hands on expertise in setting up quality management systems and developing automated software solutions to make our lives easy. And guys, if you are playing in Europe, we're going to talk about a very relevant topic today, and that is about the PSUR, or the Periodic Safety Update Report. It's a requirement in MDR, and I have a sense that a lot of us are struggling with it. So we're going to talk about challenges and best practices from Tibor's real world field experience. With that, Tibor, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you so much for inviting me, Naveen. It's great to be here. I'm great and looking forward to be talking about this topic. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Tibor. And I know you just returned from the RAPS Euroconvergence conference, right? So I want to first invite your overall impressions. Uh, what's top of mind for people in Europe? What are some of the hot topics?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to give you a quick overview about that. So it was an amazing event in Brussels. We had 3 to 4 days, really intense days of content exchanges and really the possibility to learning from each other. At the moment, what I can tell you, the biggest challenge for European manufacturers is wondering whether the European Commission will be reducing the burden of the medical device regulation for manufacturers or not. So, based on the information we have received, there is an intent to introduce a little bit of simplification altogether, but I wouldn't recommend anybody to hope for a big miracle that MDR will be reduced by 50 or 60%. And that was also a little bit the spirit of day one, because you had over 1,000 people who know that there will be still challenges. At the same time, they try to collaborate and find opportunities to working together. So, and this is something I'm usually not seeing, because if you're from competing companies, you
Mhm.
usually say, I'm not talking to this person from that company because we're in competition. But this time I saw really people, no matter what the company was from, working together, trying to elaborate and finding solutions. So really amazing. If anybody is having time next year, I think it will be in Lisbon, to going
Mhm.
to the RUPS Euroconvergence, I can more than recommend that to everyone.
Excellent. You bring up a good point, Tibor. And I'm really glad that there is a growing sense among all the stakeholders in the industry that we have to work together. This model is working very well in the United States, at least, where industry players are working together collaboratively with the FDA for many, many years through trade associations and, to some extent, influence policy, but also the practice. So I'm really glad to see that happening. So let's jump into our topic today, Tibor. We know PSUR is a very explicit and quite comprehensive requirement in UMDR. So let's start by just recapping what the regulation says about PS.
Yes, absolutely. More than happy to do that. So the PSUR, or Periodic Safety Update Report, is a hard requirement, as you pointed out, in Article 86 of the Medical Device Regulation. And I would start with a really top level, what is a definition, and then we can go a little bit into the details. So
Mhm.
basically, the PSUR should be an efficient summary for competent authorities, notified body reviewers, and also auditors to see at one glance what the general, I would say, post-market surveillance system feedback the company has received in the last year, or for example, in the last 2 years. So it shouldn't be a complete documentation about multiple hundreds of pages where
Mhm.
you're detailing each and every small factor there, but imagine it as a highly relevant executive summary to, for example, a competent authority, where somebody would be coming to your company saying, look, we got some information from the market that your medical device is unsafe, or we got some reports. Show me the big picture. What's happening here
Mhm.
with the device, and what were the experiences in the last
Mhm.
12 months? So that would be, I would say, the basic information here. What's really important to consider is that the PSUR is not required for all medical devices that are placed on the European market. So if you're having a class 1 medical device, and these medical devices also don't need any notified body involvement in the European Union, then you also don't need to have a periodic safety update report. Usually, I'm sometimes seeing that every manufacturer is saying, oh no, we need to prepare a PSUR. And then when you audit them and talk to them, you ask them, you miss the point because you missed the article actually. Because for
Mhm.
class 1 manufacturers, you need to have a so-called post-market surveillance report, which
Yeah.
is defined in Article 85 and not in 86. And I wouldn't say it's a fraction of a PSUR, but you need to have much less of details there.
But the big picture, I think, is to be able to prove at any point in the life cycle of the device that the device is safe and effective. I think that is the big picture. Now, how much
Absolutely.
evidence we need to show, how much detail we need to show based on our post market surveillance is where I believe the difference is between PMSR and PSUR, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really see it that this is I would say, a red line that is going through the whole medical device regulation. The higher the risk class of your medical device, the more evidence you need to show. And as you absolutely correctly point out, if you're having a class 1 medical device, you will have to provide some basic information about what has happened, if there were any serious incidents, for example, or something like that. But with the
Mhm.
PSUR, for example, and we can have a little chat about that in a few minutes, is you even need to provide the sales volumes and
Yeah.
who is actively using the medical device. What's the population like? How many users are expected, and so on. So you need to have much more detailed information, which, in my opinion, is logical because, on average, the higher the risk of the medical device, the higher the probability on the market out there that something could be happening to the patients while using the device.
Yeah, so let's jump right into that because as I read through the regulation, and I don't have much understanding of what happens in Europe and EU MDR, and I was literally in a way shocked and surprised to see that language explicit in the regulation that they want manufacturers to disclose the volume and also estimate the amount or the quantity in use so that they can better estimate the level of exposure. Share a little bit about how this is actually playing out in practice. How is it working and what kind of challenges manufacturers are facing when trying to compile this information for regulators?
This is a great point. So before I'm starting with my answer, I would recommend for everybody to check out the MDCG 2022-21 document, which is a guidance document solely focusing on the PSUR. So this means this is a great resource with, I think, almost 40 pages where you get different suggestions how to provide information. But let's jump into the actual question. So what I'm seeing during audits I'm implementing at medical device manufacturers, that if you are having medical devices where not too many are on the market, let's say a few hundred or even a few thousand pieces altogether, then it's usually quite simple for these manufacturers to provide you the actual sales numbers. So we are mostly talking about, let's say, startups with a limited market reach or high risk medical device manufacturers where they say, look, we only have, I don't know, 300 devices in total on the market because they're high risk and highly complex. So not too many people or hospitals are
Mhm.
using them altogether. So this is even the easier part on that one. But even if you only have, I don't know, 100 devices on the market, it gets already a little bit trickier to estimate how often the device is really used.
Mhm.
Because, of course, you're defining the number of users per patient or per user per day, probably, that you say it's for reuse or only one-time use or something like that. But I've witnessed, because I've been in the medical device market for 15 years now, and I also had companies where I certified and placed devices on the market. And I was always surprised about what the instructions for use is saying, how something
Mhm.
should be used. And then you're interviewing users and patients, and they are like using the device 10 times more often than you would expect, or
Mhm.
they're only using it once per month, even though they should be using it once per week. So here already we have some challenges. But another excellent example, what you even pointed out during our bilateral discussion a few minutes before, let's take the example of contact lenses, where you have
Mhm.
millions, billions of examples and
Mhm.
devices on the market. In that case, the best thing you can be doing is providing realistic assumptions and estimations. You probably know your batch size. You probably have some rough estimates how many devices were placed on the market
Mhm.
altogether, and then you start to use your best informed guess to estimate that.
Yeah, and you have to kind of pressure test it, make sure it passes a red face test. But Tibor, let's talk about software. Software as a medical device, and I can guess it might become very challenging to figure out how many times that specific software as a medical device has been used in practice.
I mean, this is a great point, and I would say this comes back to the question how well a software manufacturer is prepared for PMS activities. I mean,
Mhm.
in technical terms, it would be very easy to track how often a software is used. I mean, many of the everyday tools we are using, I mean, let's stay with LinkedIn, for example, the algorithm knows exactly how often I'm logging in into LinkedIn, how long I'm on LinkedIn, how many
Mhm.
interactions I'm doing per day. But the thing is, they prepared the software for that. So
Mhm.
if you're having an unexperienced team developing a new software as a medical device, and they don't think about that, then I fully agree with you. It will be extremely hard to see how often the user used the medical device or not. But if they already think about this aspect, and in my opinion, this is essential, that PMS considerations are not only done 1 week before getting the certificate, but
Mhm.
really preparing for that months or sometimes even years before getting on the market, then I would see the opportunity that you can also collect a lot of data here. So
You
maybe
know,
as an example, maybe just as an additional example, I've just audited two software as a medical device companies this year, and they have prepared for that. So they could exactly tell me how often the software was used, how many interactions were there, but this team already knew that this would be coming, so they placed that into their software, this tracking mechanism.
so, here's I think this is very fascinating to me because I see the risk practitioners in the company playing a very strategic role in the design and development process by bringing this forward. And maybe this becomes a design requirement, right? So I was going to ask you, like in these two or three examples that you have seen this practice, did you notice how and why they were able to do this in the design of the software itself? What prompted that to the extent that you can share that with us?
I mean, absolutely. So what I really see is you need to differentiate between inexperienced and experienced teams. So
Hmm.
usually with more experienced teams, you have people on the risk management side, but also a good PRRC, for example, for the European market, who have been in the medical device industry for several years, had maybe 3 to 4 roles in different companies having that. And this usually prompts the reflex by these regulatory people. Wait, when we are deploying this software, how will we calculate the number of users?
Hmm.
Because this is not only important for the PSUR, but as you are more of an expert on that than me, obviously for the risk management activities. I
Yeah.
cannot simply hope and estimate, yes, maybe my software will be used 10 times per week. I don't know. But for inexperienced teams, especially for, yes, startups in that field, I can confirm to you that when they're asking me about different things, I'm always asking them, did you consider PMS? Did you
Hmm.
think about how often, how many people will be using your technology? And for them, it's like a huge light bulb appearing saying, we had no clue. You're so right
Yeah.
to monitor that.
And Thibaut, let's I think for the benefit of our audience, let's put the big picture behind it. Why? The intent of the regulation, in my mind, is to have a little bit better estimate of the level of risk. Because I know, at least in the US, I have seen a couple of FDA warning letters where FDA has openly questioned the calculation method for probability of occurrence by using the quantity produced and shipped, not necessarily the quantity used. So it seems to me that the regulators are very sensitive to potentially underestimation of the level of risk. And that's why they're insisting on a little bit better estimate of the exposure. Does that sound about right to you that this might be the driving force behind this requirement?
Yes, absolutely. Because if we look at the European market back during the times of the Medical Device Directive before the MDR, everybody did a little bit of PMS, but it was mostly passive PMS, meaning
Yeah,
that if you're getting 10 complaints or incidents or something like that, that was all the information you had. But now with
correct.
the MDR, as you're pointing out, it's not only about collecting the information, but at the end of the day, it's mostly about the benefit risk ratio. You're trying to estimate and correctly estimate also with the PSUR. And here with risk management, I mean, I've seen so many random numbers where engineers did their best to do some estimations, but I was always wondering, can you prove that on the real market? Could you provide me a little bit more exact numbers than that? It's maybe
Yeah.
okay for the first year. If you're getting on the market, I would say it's absolutely fine to make estimations. But as you
Yeah.
point out, if the product has been on the market for a few years and you still don't update these estimations, then
Mhm.
yes, I can understand the FDA or the European Commission then stating, you're not only collecting PMS data for fun because it's
Yeah.
about patient safety. And
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
just one more comment there. Still, I would like to also protect the manufacturers a little bit, because if you're having a risk management file where you have, I don't know, 700 different risks that you need to assess, and then you
Mhm.
have 5,000 complaints, somebody needs to map these. Yes, we are in times of AI, we are in times of machine learning, but before that, honestly, it was even complicated if you had 50 different risks and you had 1,000 complaints and you had to do the assessment and the mapping there. But sometimes things are getting really out of control in terms of exponential effort.
Excellent point. So, guys, if you're just joining us, my guest today is Tibor Zechmeister, and we are talking about challenges and best practices for preparing PSUR in compliance with EU MDR. But, guys, as you know, this is not a webinar or a lecture. This is just a very informal, casual conversation, and you are a part of that. I would love for you to share your questions, comments, your insights, what has worked for you as far as PSUR is concerned. Please share that with all of us. So, having said that, now we do have a comment from Richard Mark here. If someone uses a number of units sold to estimate the probability of harm, the risk will be hugely inflated relative to the realistic number of uses of the software. So keep those comments coming. Thank you for sharing that. Tibor, I want to continue our discussion on this. Let's talk about some of the most frequent findings you have come across in your audits when it comes to
Mhm.
PSUR.
Yes, absolutely. So, as I mentioned before, one of the things I really see when not only for class one medical device manufacturers, but also for high risk medical device manufacturers, sometimes they're still confusing these Article 85 and 86 requirements. Who has
Mhm.
to do PSUR? Who has to do the post market surveillance report? So, there is a little bit of confusion here. Another thing, what I really often see is, and this is probably only a problem if you're doing your conversion and transition from the MDD to the medical device regulation, I see that oftentimes these legacy manufacturers don't really know what their legal requirements are in terms
Mhm.
of PSUR. So even though the guidance document clearly states who has to do PSURs, even during the transitional periods, we sometimes had the case that the company said, well, I'm MDD and not MDR. I'm still in the transitional period. I don't have to do any of and
Mhm.
yeah, that's not a too helpful information altogether. You need to do something about that. And the other thing what I'm seeing is, and this is a legally complicated topic. I see a few manufacturers inventing their own PSUR template, even though
Mhm.
the guidance document I've mentioned, 2022-21 of the MDCG guidance documents, even though there is a template with contents and recommended structures for data and so on, they're not adhering to that. The tricky part here is these guidance documents are not legally required, but at the same time, they're seen as best practice and state of the art to use. So
Yeah.
this is sometimes happening that I see that they're inventing their own thing. And I'm not giving them a non-conformity and saying, look, this is not legally conforming or something like that. Still strongly recommend them to use the template provided by MDCG. Why? Because for me as an auditor, I mean, I don't want to create a bad situation for them. But if a
Mhm.
competent authority is coming, for example, and they're expecting this template structure, and this is not the structure they are then encountering, they might bring the manufacturer into trouble, telling them, you know what, this is not the structure we expected. You have to repair that in a day or something like that. Otherwise,
Mhm.
we are freezing your certificates or something like that.
Wow, that can be serious. I guess the way I understand this is a template is a tool for communication, and if our communication is not smooth with notified bodies or other regulatory authorities, we plant a seed of doubt in their mind about our analysis. And benefit risk tends to be quite challenging anyway. So it seems to me that if there's a best practice, why not apply it? And if there are fields that you cannot complete in the template, maybe you have a good reason for that. Maybe you communicate that, right? So,
Absolutely. If you have a justification, then this is absolutely fine. As we mentioned
yeah,
before with the contact lenses, if the
yeah,
template states you have to provide the exact number, but you justify that you cannot provide the exact number, this is more than okay if it's justified.
yeah. Or you can provide some estimation of the level of uncertainty. Right? What is the level of confidence if I said, "Hey, I shipped 1 million units, but only 800,000 were used, and I'm 95% confident." I think you will make a much better case. Okay, so I know we are getting into a little bit weeds here, Tibor, but I do wanna, in the remaining time we have, discuss with you some of the best practices, especially when it comes to integrating the PSUR activities with risk management or, for example, clinical evaluation. Can you say a few things about that?
Yes. So number one, I would definitely recommend to everybody that the PSUR is not simply an exercise you're doing once per year. So you check the boxes and you show the auditors that you have done your work. It needs to be a living activity, as you point out. You need also to update continuously your risk management file. You need to update your clinical evaluation file. Also, if there are any issues with your current medical devices for preventive and corrective actions. So
Mhm.
number one, and I would never recommend that to anybody, don't see it as a one-time event per year where you say, no matter what happened on the market, my job is to just summarize every 2 years or every year everything in the PSUR. The other
Mhm.
thing I would really strongly recommend, and this is also something I'm seeing, is there is sometimes this missing link between the PSUR, the clinical evaluation, and the risk management. The worst thing that could be happening that in the PSUR, you communicate that you had some serious incidents and there were some relevant issues, and you neither reflected in your risk management documentation nor in your CAPA cases or your clinical evaluation. I know it's highly complex to connect everything with each other, but at the same time, this is the point of the PSUR. It should be an aggregative document and not something standalone where you say, yes, I don't care about the clinical evaluation because I'm just here to fill out the template that was required. See it as a living document, as an active process. And even if you start filling out the PSUR 3 months before it's due, already put some information there that might be helpful to finish it. You don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah. So Tibor, let's emphasize this point once again because if you read ISO 13485 carefully, it recognizes a process-based approach. And if you take that approach and develop a risk-based strategy, understanding the interactions of these different processes, inputs and outputs, and what happens in each process, you will be able to connect them. And the key point here to highlight is treat that as a process and not as a standalone activity. Super. So, Tibor, I'm very curious now, given the work you do in your business today, to learn a little bit more about some automation tools that you think could be applied to PSUR development or other risk management activities. I mean, we are living in the world of high tech and AI and machine learning, and this is a heavy lift for many organizations. So, are there things happening right now that tools being developed that people can use?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm happy to answer that. While I'm answering that, I will disclose that I'm a little bit biased, of course, because I am currently working in a company that is providing these software as a service tools. So just for full disclosure, that everything I'm saying right now is maybe a little bit more biased than than on
Mhm.
the other topics. But yes, I can tell you 2 years ago, when we look at 2023, when you talk to most of the medical device manufacturers about automation tools and maybe AI supported tools, no matter if you were talking to established small to medium enterprises or even large corporates, they would be saying, we don't need that. What's that? Why are you bothering with that? But I would say 2025 was the first year where you see on a broad level that there is a huge interest in the industry. because they see the potential of AI and also automation tools altogether. To fully answer your question, so what two examples that are already right now in the market, which is provided by my company, but also by a lot of other companies, for example, is A, supporting PMCF activities, such as doing a literature search, because everybody who has done a literature search knows how painful that can be to go through different and relevant sources of publications. Then you have to
Mhm.
sort them, you have to include, exclude them, extract data. So this is something where PMCF input can help to then finally summarize the PSUR information. And the other thing is you need to monitor similar medical devices. And
Mhm.
to everybody out there in the US, of course, FDA mod, for example, is one of these sources where you can get this information. But in Europe, we also have due to the different many countries we are having, you have a lot of different vigilance databases and safety databases like the BfArM in Germany or the MHRA in the UK. And here again, some tools are aggregating these searches, saying that you don't have to go to 20 different websites and
Yeah,
collect different interfaced information in different formats, but you can enter into one interface all the information you need, and then it's getting extracted. And this
I
is
got
only
you.
about automation. AI is a whole nother story.
Yeah.
Imagine really that you're giving the system 5,000 different complaints, then you have your risk management table, and then you
Mhm.
tell the system, look, we need to map that and re-estimate for me the probability and severity of individual risks based on the information. This is
Right.
something so far only humans did, and honestly, the human brain is not made for these highly exponential and then
Mhm.
tricky things. I know that some people are capable of doing that, but the average human brain is not made for that. And this is
Mhm.
where AI is really coming in handy. Saying, look, I can process things in half a second where a human brain would need 20 days
Yeah.
to analyze at least a day. So I really am a big advocate of these technologies. However, I would really add to that, these systems need to be validated. So you
Yes.
cannot simply tell, look, I'm using ChatGPT to process my risk management table and updates. You really need to have validated systems out there. Otherwise, I wouldn't call it, I would still call it a risk to your quality management system because you have to validate all your other software. Why shouldn't
Yeah.
you validate your AI supported tools using
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. But I think it's good for us to hear that tools are being developed. And I know a couple of weeks ago we had this conversation about automation tools for clinical evaluation reporting. And I guess there is a connecting point here. I think so much activity is happening in this space. Very, very important to keep an eye on it, follow it, maybe talk to some of the vendors, try their system and do a demo. Connect with people like Tibor, guys. So I know we are running short on time. So Tibor, I want to give you a couple of minutes to process your thoughts and think about two or three key takeaways that we can take away from our discussion today. But, guys, in the meantime, I want to share a couple of announcements with you. First, as this topic that we talked about today relates to post market surveillance, I want to tell you that I have a 4-hour Zoom workshop, a very hands on workshop on post market safety surveillance from a regulatory point of view, but also from a very practical point of view, where I can help you master some of the advanced techniques for signal detection when you don't have enough data or a clear trend. I can also help you build systems for decision making to take action on those signals and integrate that with your CAPA process. If you like more information, please reach out to me and I will share that with you. The second thing I want to tell you guys is that, as you know, we do these sessions every Friday at 11 Eastern, and many times you cannot attend these sessions in person. For that, I produce a recording of our conversations and publish them as podcast recordings on the Let's Talk Risk newsletter website. If you are not familiar with that, please let me know and I'll send you a link. Sign up. 70% of my content is free, and all these recordings of our podcasts are free for everybody. You don't have to pay a single dollar. And all these resources are freely available to you. Please take advantage of that and become part of our community. With that, Tibor, the floor is yours. Please share with us a couple of key takeaway points.
Yes, thank you very much. So I would say the most important thing, and that should be something that should be number one on our priority list, is why we are doing these PSURs. And at the end of the day, I know there are regulatory requirements. I know that auditors will be checking for that. But at the same time, it should be an essential snapshot for us to see is your medical device really safe or not? Because we need to combine so many aspects there. And usually you have different experts in different departments. The risk manager has a different view and opinion on certain topics than, for example, the PMS expert or the quality manager. But the PSUR gives you really a great snapshot to see, is everything running smoothly? Did we overlook something we need to consider? So that would be really the first priority I would put my emphasis on. It's not
Mhm.
about producing a 200-page document showing off to auditors or competent authority how great you are writing, for example. It should be
Mhm.
really a snapshot about, is everything going on okay or not. The second
Mhm.
thing after this layer would be definitely, please, if possible, and if you don't have a special justification why not to do so, stick to the MDCG guidances and also the template forms. What the commission, the competent authorities, but also notified bodies are expecting. Not because it's the best thing to do or it's the best possible approach, but Naveen, as you pointed out, these facilitators for easier communication. Because if
Mhm.
I, as an auditor, for example, see the provided information always in the same structure, it's much easier for me, for example, to navigate to the right sections and to see, okay, I'm first interested in severe adverse events. Then I would be interested in looking at the benefit risk ratio and so on. So
Mhm.
that would be my second take home message. And the third one would be, as we pointed out, and that's so really important, see it as a continuous process and see it as an interrelated process between risk management, clinical evaluation, kappa, and general post-market surveillance activities.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, if it's an isolated document, nobody will have any, I would say, use of that if it's not interlinked with the aspects we have. So these
Correct.
would be my
Wonderful.
three take-home messages for today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Since we have mentioned this MDCG guidance many times, we're going to share a link to this
Yes.
document, which is publicly available. We'll share that in comments on this events page and also in our show notes when we publish this podcast. With that, guys, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate your time and I hope you're getting value out of this. Please let me know if you have any feedback. I would love to hear from you. What's working for you? What is not working for you in these weekly conversations? If you have any suggestions for topics, please reach out. If you want to be a speaker, please reach out because trust me, it requires no preparation. And all of us, I believe, have something to contribute and share. Thanks again, everybody. Tibor, thank you so much for taking the time out from your busy schedule, sharing your insights with us. I appreciate that very much. Everybody, have a good weekend ahead.
Thank you so much for having me, Naveen, and thank you everyone for joining today. Have a great weekend.